Welcome in to the Devy Devotional Podcast, a show devoted to all things Devy and C2C. Hosted by John Arrington and Aaron Wilcox. This dynamic duo brings you actionable strategies with player-driven analysis for your Devy and C2C leagues. Let's dive in.
Let's dive in. Welcome into the Devy Devotional Podcast, where we stay devoted to Devy. I'm your host, Dynasty Coach A, joined as always by Aaron Wilcox at Aaron Wilcox86 on Twitter or X. And I am excited to actually be talking about real football, like football that has happened. Touchdowns have been scored. Players have done really well. Players have done not as well as maybe we thought. And that's what we're basically going to be talking about tonight. You know, it's now that we actually have some football, we can finally stop projecting and doing all this stuff. Maybe there's a little bit of projecting still going on. But, you know, we can actually sit here and go, hey, you know, were we right? Were we wrong? And more importantly, are we going to be winning some championships? All that kind of good stuff. But first, how are you doing tonight, Aaron?
Hey, I'm doing well. Yes, it was refreshing to have football back. And man, it's just going to be an exciting season. So many players out there popping off, and now we're seeing some of these takes materialize. And yeah, I just love this time of year, that's for sure. So looking forward to more college games and also the NFL starting here this week too.
And not to toot our own horn too much, but I guess I'm going to go ahead and do it anyway. Man, I'll tell you what, it seemed like after week 0 and week 1, that last podcast that we did, 2 weeks ago, really had a lot of clippable moments. And, you know, I was throwing them out on Twitter, like every time it was like, this guy blew up, this guy blew up, this guy blew up. It's like, holy crap. You know, maybe we don't always bat 1,000, but I'll tell you what, we did pretty damn good on that last pod.
Yeah, we did. We hit a lot of players. So go back and listen to that if you just want an idea what this upcoming class might look like. And so far, that podcast is looking pretty good as far as, you know, it's not like things have completely changed 1 week into the season, or I guess 2 weeks into the season for some, depending on if your team played in week 0. But yeah, it's looking good early on.
All right, but enough about us and all of our dubs. Why don't we get into... Actually, why don't we start negative here? Why don't we get into some of maybe the players that have kind of fallen off a little bit through 1 week, but maybe, you know, we're a little concerned about, you know, how they started the season off, all that kind of stuff. I guess you know, I'm thinking of somebody like a Cade Klubnik. You know, like you had mentioned in the pre-show. I think that's a perfect one to start off with because, I mean, there's been people that have been very hyped about Klubnik. We were never really those people, but you know, but at the same time, we also were never like, oh, he can't possibly be good. He can't be, you know, he can't possibly be one of the top guys in the class, because we just didn't have enough of a sample to really say like, no, he's definitely 100% terrible. We thought he might not be the greatest, but I'll tell you what, man, week 1, he goes out and just looks absolutely terrible. What'd you think of that performance?
Yeah, if it would have been against an Alabama or some Georgia, something that was just insanely difficult as the first, you know, game of the season, I would get it. But he had all off season to prepare for Duke, and Duke's not like this powerhouse team, right? I mean, it's just not that formidable of a defense, honestly. And yeah, he just did not look in sync with his wide receivers, and you can blame maybe the coaching staff and new system, but at the end of the day, it should have been better than that. I mean, he was what, 27 for 43, so that's 62% completion percentage for 209 yards, barely clearing 200 yards in a game where they needed to throw because they went down, they lost the game. And then he had 4.9 average yards per pass attempt. I mean, that's real bad. Like, that's real dink and dunk. And 1 touchdown, 1 interception. It's just those numbers are not going to get it done for your C2C leagues. They're definitely not going to get it done for Clemson. So unfortunately, that's kind of a stock down. You know, not to say that the guy can never salvage his career. I mean, he hasn't had a lot of experience, but it's not a promising start by any means.
No, it's not, and it's even more worrisome because he has had attempts in the past. Like it's not like this was his first start or anything like that. And like you said, Duke's not a powerhouse. He had 2.7% big time throw rate, not great. He had 8.5 intended air yards per pass, or a dot, however you want to call it, which is lending to that like dink and dunk, like you were talking about. Like you don't see a lot of like quality QBs dinking and dunking at around the 8 yard clip, nine, like nine, 9.5, 10. Like that's where we start getting okay. Like this is okay. Like your top guys, like your let's see, your Caleb Williams. Actually, Caleb Williams is at 9.6. We'll get into Caleb Williams a little bit later, but he was at 9.6. But like some of the top guys, like Jackson Dart this week. I'm not saying a top guy as far as like Devy purposes, but like for this week, top guys 13. Michael Penix Jr. 12.5. Shador Sanders 10.8. Like that's what you're wanting to see, not 8.5 out of a guy. But then. But then also like the points per touch, just everything was really low for Klubnik here, and like you said, I don't think that it's going to get much better. It could get a little bit better as the season progresses, as he ages and progresses and all that kind of stuff. I think that I've been basically all out on Klubnik. I think we had talked about him being fifth in the 2025 rankings, maybe a couple months ago, something like that, as far as the 2025 class, but I don't think anything's changed. If anything, he might have fallen a little bit lower for me.
And I can't remember. You're right. It was a little bit lower. I'm not sure if it was quite ever to like the Ty Simpson area, just because I mean, unfortunately, at Alabama, things have just not really clicked for him. But yes, definitely some concerns there. So, but you mentioned Caleb Williams. I guess I am kind of curious. Do you have a USC take, or is there any disappointment that you're viewing USC with right now?
Not really disappointment necessarily. I believe he looked really rusty. Caleb Williams looked really rusty in week one. It was against nobody, so of course they rolled all over him and everything. But I do believe that he really looked rusty. Week two, I didn't watch as much of the game, so I can't really say if he looked anything. And once again, they rolled all over him. But I don't think that we can take too much away from it, and so like the one game that I did watch, he looked rusty. I have no idea how he really looked in week two. Obviously, I've seen the clips on, the highlights from people like, oh my God, look at this insane throw. But whether it's the O-line, whether it's him, he always seems to have to be running his ass off to try to like make a play. And obviously we love the quarterbacks that can make that happen, but it seems like it's every play. And like the plays breaking down on every play. And once again, I'm not a film guy. I'm not trying to scout or break that kind of stuff down to say it's his fault or anything like that. I'm just saying it is happening. And so I am a little concerned about once they get into conference, maybe not conference play because Pac-12, but once they get into like they have a tougher schedule. Like I think they play like Notre Dame and like a couple like top end schools there in like maybe the middle of the season. So I am a little concerned once they actually hit like a real opponent, what is going to happen. The other thing we've seen with some of these players, we've seen Zachariah Branch blow up in week one, like absolutely blow up, looked amazing on like, short, like minimal touches, if you will, but I mean, it just absolutely looked amazing. And then, they're trying to get Mekhi Lemon going. They're trying to get Deuce Robinson going. Like they're doing all this stuff. I really think that they're just trying to see what they have while they have these easy opponents. And then later on down the road, it's going to be more like, okay, now we have to get our actual like players in there. So I don't know if we can truly take away, because I know, we've talked about it in group chats and stuff. Like I'm the biggest Dorian Singer fan in the world. And he hasn't done a lot. I mean, he's been a part of the team. No one really has done a lot. I mean, technically, Taj Washington is the wide receiver one for USC right now. So if you believe that Taj Washington's the best wide receiver on their team, then by all means, they go ahead and just take everything as is right now. But I think that they're really trying to see what they have. They have this young team. They have these young players. When we're gonna win by 50, why not play these guys, see what we have, and then we'll later on we'll get into, okay, we actually need to win this game, and we're gonna put the best players out there.
Yeah, and I think that's fair. I guess I'll touch on the Singer thing here in a second, but with the Caleb Williams stylistic play, I mean, I do think that there'll be some similar play style concerns, or at least maybe not even concerns, but just play style as like a Kyler Murray out there who needs to potentially scramble around a little bit just to free himself some room and just be able to see downfield, make wide receivers extend the play, get open for them, or just use the legs. I mean, they possess great scrambling abilities and playmaking abilities for their team. So I think that there's probably going to be that potential where Caleb Williams does end up having to run around much more than some of the very elites. But ultimately, I like him as a weapon. Hopefully, he does continue to get better as he gets more of those reps this season. With just, I mean, some new wide receivers in that core, or at least he's losing his best target out there. And you mentioned Dorian Singer coming in from Arizona. Um, I can't say that I'm not a little bit disappointed with the start. And should is the starting offense out there the whole game against these guys? No. They played San Jose State, they played Nevada, and you're right, they wanted to get these young guys minimal touches, but they really blew up on those minimal touches versus on the minimal touches that Dorian Singer had, less efficient, 6 for 78 yards total between the two games and a touchdown. A little bit less explosive than we had hoped, but again, we can't bury him on a small sample, but you look back at what a guy like Jordan Addison went last year against Rice. He went 5 for 54 yards and 2 touchdowns. And then in Stanford, he went off for 7 for 172 and 2 touchdowns. So he kind of was, really showing up as that number one right off the bat. I'm not sure that Dorian Singer's coming in quite that hot, but I also don't think that anybody's comparing him quite to a Jordan Addison, who was a very good prospect. So ultimately, a little bit of concern, but if we're doing that concern rating, where are you from 0 to 10 with Singer? Because I'm kind of like right in the middle with him. I'm not like panicking, but I'm also not. It means something to me.
Yeah, I can get behind that. I mean, I honestly, I'm not concerned because, like I said, I really do think that they're testing it out. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but that's what it seems like. If you look at it, we have per game, Zachariah Branch, Taj Washington, Mario Williams, and Dorian Singer are averaging through 2 games 3 receptions per game. So they all have 3 receptions. So you can't even say like one. Who's the wide receiver one right now? You can't say. Now I will say just from experience and stuff like that, I would still assume that's Dorian Singer. But we haven't. No one's been tested. Not to mention Taj Washington has had these huge plays, these 40, 50-yard plays, 60-yard plays even, scoring touchdowns that just end drives. You don't have to throw to a Dorian Singer or anyone for that matter at that point. If anything, I might be a little concerned about Mekhi Lemon, but I mean, I'm not going to freak out about a true freshman, not doing anything through 2 games either. So like, I'm not losing my mind about that. But I mean, he's barely done anything. He's been involved, but I mean, it's not fantastic. He has. I mean, if you really want to look at everyone else on the team, I mean, Dorian Singer, 3.3 PPR points per touch. Mario Williams, 2.65 PPR points per touch. Deuce Robinson, 5 PPR points per touch. Mekhi Lemon, 1.3. So like it drops off pretty damn hard there. And then Zachariah Branch at 4.3. Taj Washington, 7.8 PPR points per touch. Taj Washington. Taj Washington is the clear wide receiver 1. We have to just run with it. Add him on all of your waiver wire. No, it just, that's what I'm saying. It just seems like everything's a little too fluky right now, and that's why I'm not freaking out. I get a little bit of concerned. I would have loved to have seen, I hyperbolically called for 3 touchdowns in week 1 from Dorian Singer. Now I got 1. And it was very early, but it hasn't quite been as great as I would have liked to, him to start the season. But I'm not really not concerned.
Sure. Are you concerned about Ohio State? We'll change gears here. They're going to go through some growing pains here with a slightly different offense and different QBs playing. Man, it was kind of a rough game, specifically for McCord, but the whole offense really saw the struggle, right? The quarterback play did not help them out at all, and the running game didn't even come through either. So I think the offensive line, deserves some blame there. McCord didn't do what he needed to do. Yeah, I mean, do you think they're going to turn it around? They have the weapons to do so. They have, you would think the system in place to really maybe make things right here going forward.
I've been pretty vocal about my concerns about the quarterback situation. How, I felt like them not naming a QB basically meant that they don't have a QB, and so I didn't see anything in that first game that made me change my mind on that. So yes, to answer your question, I am concerned. I'm not concerned about the players themselves as far as Marvin Harrison Jr. and Emeka Ibuka, Trevion Henderson, like all that. Like all the running game looked. I won't say the running game. The offensive line looked absolutely terrible. It looked absolutely terrible. The running game was fine, decent, whatever you want to call it. It was not great by any means. And I guess I am a little concerned about Trevion Henderson if he's going to be the player that I thought he was, just because is the offensive line, is the offense in general going to let him be? Not to mention, they really are splitting it like 3 or 4 ways with those players. And we kind of expected that, but it may be worse than we kind of feared. And Mayan Williams definitely seems to be the goal line back. So that's all a little scary. But getting back to the actual passing offense, I am a little concerned. I honestly was about to take Emeka Ibuka out of my starting C2C roster, and then I realized that they were playing Youngstown State, and I was like, "Oh, okay, I'm going to go ahead and leave him in there." So I'm not going to freak out just yet. Now, if they don't produce against Youngstown State, then we might have some problems.
How much are they going to crush Youngstown State by now? Like being fired up, being just ready for just
that's the thing. Normally, I might be a little concerned that, they're going to score 1 touchdown and then take everyone out of the game or whatever, but they need to show that they can actually do something. And I mean, the worst part is I know it was only a few plays, but like Devin Brown came in and was not any better. If anything, he was worse than Kyle McCord for those 3 plays, the smallest of samples. But man, they need to show something, and I feel like they probably will. And they might win 100-0. Like it might happen. Emeka Ibuka might have 8 touchdowns this weekend. So I'm leaving him in my lineup. I am concerned, man. I'll tell you, Kyle McCord did not. I know it's very early, and people were posting on Twitter this is CJ Stroud's first 18 pass attempts, and this is Kyle McCord's. Let's not do that, guys. That. This is not the same. We can use our eyes, and we can actually figure out that these are not the same things.
Yeah, no, that's fair for sure. And it sounds like we're so negative, starting off with some of the underwhelming starts to the college football season. But, we're going to give you guys some really, exciting takes, some maybe things to look forward to or that are very encouraging here in a minute. But we would be silly not to talk about one of the best offenses, rushing offenses in the entire nation, Minnesota. Minnesota looking terrible. No, I'm just kidding. But I mean, for real, Minnesota's running game, at least in C2C leagues, you're always paying attention. Who is that running back 1? Well, don't expect those running back 1 numbers this season out of Minnesota. Mo Ibrahim, he's gone. And after him, I actually like Zach Evans, who didn't even play in this game. He was a true freshman last year. But Sean Tyler out there, yuck, 41 yards. And he's not going to be it. He's not truly dynamic or big enough, in my opinion. And then the next closest was Bryce Williams with 14 rushing yards. And that's against the Nebraska team who will play tough, yes, but they're not like a top 5 unit either with that new coaching staff and system and all that. So anyways, that Minnesota offense, they were actually throwing the ball, which was exciting, but it was dink and dunk. It wasn't at least a prolific down the field passing attack at all. So just don't expect high flying offense, especially running game out of Minnesota this season, as much as it hurts. And yes, I'll probably still go to a Minnesota game this season, but not expecting the score to be 60-50 or anything like that.
No, and I mean the passing attempts were promising, but man, I'll tell you what, like you said, it was a lot of dink and dunk. I had high hopes for Elijah Spencer this year because I felt like they were going to pass more. They talked about it, that the offense was going to do more and all that kind of stuff, and it's true, except for everything's 2 yards past the line of scrimmage. So it's like Elijah Spencer's more of a downfield threat, and you're just not going to get too many of those. So unfortunately, that part might not work out, but I think we've talked way too much about Minnesota at this point. So I mean, are there anyone else we've been concerned about? Ohio State, we've been concerned about, maybe some people at USC, not necessarily really. Like we're not done yet. They're done there yet, I should say. But are there any other teams, players, or anything that you're really freaking out about? Because I'd like to get into the good players, the ones that we want to talk about. Uh-oh. Looks like Aaron froze up a little bit. I'll actually mention one. I've been pretty much all out on Matthew Golden for quite a while now. Not all out, but I've been much lower on Matthew Golden than just about everyone else. And I feel like I was kind of vindicated in week one. I mean, I don't want to do victory laps after 1 week, but it sure seems like a player that I probably could if I really wanted to.
Yeah, I mean, Matthew Gold, not the hot start. And I just don't think that offense, that's why when I went on the C2C podcast recently, he was one of the guys that I was a little bit skeptical on. I also listed Will Shipley, and I'm not victory lapping that because honestly, it was the offense's fault. Like if the offense would have got their stuff together, I'm sure Shipley would have had, a pretty good day. But ultimately, some of the concerns there, with Matthew Golden are offense related. His share might take a tick up, but he didn't start off hot at least. So yeah, there might be something to our concerns with Matthew Golden. And I was going to shout out maybe the Florida offense just because we didn't expect it to be prolific, but unfortunately they didn't even get their most talented running back, Trevor Etienne. I mean, they gave him some carries. He did seem like he was the lead back, but they were still sharing that backfield, and it was yucky as far as trying to get him in creative situations and or just block anything open. So, I mean, I get that Utah is a tough team. They really are. So matchup wise, I'm not like, again, if it's 0 to 10 on the panic meter, I mean, maybe it's like a 4 as far as like CFF production and things like that. But for him to really grow his stock, I mean, the offense has to do something. So I'm hopeful that they'll have some good games this season. But yeah, Florida, not the most impressive start.
No, not at all. And I mean, I think that it was to be expected. Graham Mertz is not a quarterback. Like he's just not. And I don't know why they ever thought. I know they screwed up the whole Jaden Rashada thing and all that. But I mean, like I don't know why they ever thought that. Like Florida should be able to get better quarterbacks than Graham Mertz. Like it should happen. And I don't know what it is about Florida. I don't know if they're cursed or what, but it's just they cannot get a freaking quarterback. It doesn't happen every year. It's just like if we just had a quarterback, we could do. Nope, it's not happening. So you can hear the tilt in my voice. I hated everything. The worst, actually, it was the worst thing that ever happened in the beginning, and then I realized it was actually the best thing that ever happened. But as I was going to turn on the game, Spectrum, I have Spectrum TV. Spectrum lost their service with Disney and ESPN. Like literally at 8 o'clock. I was watching the pregame show, 7:30 to 8. Everything's good. 8 o'clock hit. It starts doing some kind of like pregame thing, and I'm like, all right, cool, game time, and goes blank. And I was like, what the hell's going on? I'm freaking out. I'm trying to I'm flipping channels. Every other channel works, but not ESPN. And then I'm going on Twitter. People are like, oh, Spectrum sucks, like blah, blah, blah. Come to find out, Spectrum didn't pay Disney. They didn't, so they don't have those channels anymore. It happened literally as that game was starting. And so I'm pissed. Then I started looking at the box score. I was no longer pissed. They saved me from having to watch that nightmare of a game. So I was like, thank you, Spectrum. You knew what you were doing.
Yeah, sometimes it's nice to just get lucky like that, huh? You thought it was bad luck. It's actually good luck. So we don't
Exactly.
have to, yeah. And we don't really have to waste time on the Alabama. Like they are who we thought they were as far as, Jalen Milroe, he's going to run around. It's going to be fun for maybe his fantasy managers who roster him because he'll probably get a couple rushing touchdowns, maybe not every single game, but the majority of games he's going to be relevant on the ground and he'll do just enough passing wise to potentially get Alabama some wins here. But is that going to allow the offense to really flourish? Is that going to allow the running backs to rack up touchdowns in the red zone or just in general? And is it going to allow the wide receivers to get a heavy workload? No. And we kind of saw that. And I get it was against lower competition, so we didn't get to really see them, keep the gas on the whole game. But, I guess you should be at least looking forward to seeing Isaiah Bond develop. He was pretty exciting in this game with that one long touchdown, but I mean, that was kind of his big play of the day. So ultimately, yeah, if you're relying on them for week to week production on your team, I don't know exactly what to tell you there. We kind of saw this coming as far as it's not going to be as prolific as it has been in past years at Alabama.
Yeah, if I'm not taking a lot away from USC in their first two games, I'm definitely not taking a lot from Alabama in its first game. I honestly, I only watched the first maybe 5 minutes of that game, and I don't think Jalen Milroe looked very good in those 5 minutes. Now, obviously, he put up great numbers and everything after that. I don't really know exactly what happened, but if it's Middle Tennessee or whoever the hell they were playing, something to that effect. So I'm not overly concerned about that. Yeah, it's great to see. We were both like, I guess, hesitant, but still believing in Isaiah Bond at the beginning of the year or during the offseason. So I guess that's good to see that we still can see that the big play potential and all that kind of stuff from Bond, which is what we were kind of hoping for anyway. I really struggle to believe that Jalen Milroe is a quality quarterback. I don't see it. But I don't think we can take too much away from it. So we just have to wait at this point.
Yeah, exactly. We do have to wait a little bit, and you could look at like the completion percentage. Like at least he's in the 70%. But you look at competition, you look at some of the factors that go into that, and like you said, not a big takeaway other than I mean he looks comfortable. They're not rotating in quarterbacks, so it's maybe not quite as dire of a situation if you have him on your fantasy team as it is like having Kyle McCord right now, where you're kind of worried that any moment they're just going to pull the plug on on McCord as their starter. I don't know that we're there yet for Alabama, but we'll see. Texas looming this week. That's going to be a big, big game. I think it's like 6 p.m. or something this Saturday, and I would like to watch that game. That should be fun.
Well, I have another one that I'm a little concerned. Or actually, I wouldn't say I'm a little concerned with. Like, I don't believe I was already mostly out on this player, and then week one happened, and they upset Clemson. I don't believe that Riley Leonard's an NFL QB. I just don't. Like I thought there was glimpses of hope, but I don't see it. He literally had a 0% big time throw rate in this game. Like obviously a very important game, a game that they won. And Clemson was terrible, so they just kept giving the ball back to Duke, and Duke was like, yeah, we're gonna win by a little bit. So it's like it. Nothing spectacular. Nothing. Riley Leonard had a 0% big time throw rate. He had 5.4 intended air yards per pass. 5.4. Remember, we were talking about who was it earlier at 8.5 that we were saying wasn't the greatest. 5.4 is terrible. So Cam Fancher, if you know who that is, had 5.8, and I'm trying to remember Marshall. The quarterback for Marshall, Cam Fancher, had 5.8 intended air yards. He actually had 0.4 more intended air yards per pass than Riley Leonard did. So that just goes to show you what you're dealing with.
Nobody should know who that is. That's.
I actually almost drafted Cam Fancher in one of our C2C leagues.
Looks like you're missing out, man. Better than Riley Leonard. You heard it here first.
Completely missing. I did not draft him because I finally decided that his 48% completion rate was not good enough, but he does some running as well. So
yeah, and I mean Leonard was always a nice floor pick for C2C leagues just because of the rushing floor, literally. But at the end of the day, you're right. He needs to take a step forward passing wise. We didn't quite see that. But Clemson's defense, I guess at least their pass defense is solid enough where let's see what he does this season. But it sure didn't catapult him into consideration for the QB3 in the class. However, who would you say right now is the guy who rose up and probably is going to take that spot this season?
Well, I'll tell you what. I think that I'm sorry. Okay, so you're asking about the 2024 class. I thought we were getting into a different class there. So
No.
All right, 2024 class. It's tough to say right now, but I think that I saw everything I needed to see from J.J. McCarthy. Now, it wasn't the greatest defense or anything like that he had to play against, but all we've talked about all off season, or at least all I've talked about all off season, is how the team or the coaches are saying that they're going to throw more. They're going to throw more. They're going to throw more. Well, they threw more. If anything, who'd they play? I can't remember right now. Whoever they played, I can't think of it right now.
Was it like
Actually,
East Carolina or something?
I think that sounds right. Whoever it was, they basically sold out against the run. Like they stopped every single run play. And think about how good Michigan's run offense is, and they could not run. I mean, you had a couple big plays, like Corum had like a 30-yarder, Donovan Edwards had a couple big plays, but like when you think about Michigan's offense, that is not like, oh, they had one or two big plays or whatever. It's they broke off, you know, this many, this 90-yarder for a touchdown and this 60-yarder for a touchdown. Like that was not happening. They sold out for that. JJ McCarthy, a normally rushing QB, had negative yardage. Like they were selling out for the run. They were saying JJ McCarthy, throw on us, and guess what he did? He threw on them. You know, it easier competition. Not trying to like victory lap it or anything like that, but he showed us that he can definitely do it. And let's see here. I thought I had him, but oh, here he is. Okay, so he had I lost it. I'm sorry.
Yeah. I mean, he had some impressive throws out there where he was scrambling outside the pocket and he delivers a super accurate pass for a touchdown. That was one that really stuck out as far as watching back some of the plays he made. So he's certainly making a claim for that QB3 spot, and it's really grown on me, you know, having him there. That's who I currently have. You've kind of been able to chip away at some of the reservations I had this offseason. So that's, you know, a good call on your end. And honestly, JJ McCarthy, he's showing this season that, yeah, he's ready to make that next step up. We'll have to see, I guess, as they continue on the season. But yeah, I love what I saw out of him.
Yeah, and I will say, like, some of those plays to Roman Wilson, like, some of those throws to Roman Wilson were just, like, perfect NFL throws, like, what you want to see. And I hate to say it over and over again, but, of course, against lower competition, but I'm also not expecting Roman Wilson to catch 3 touchdowns per game. But, you know, I think that we saw that it can be done. You know, like it can happen. And so that's all I needed to see, because he was already there. He was already my QB3. So nothing changed for this week. It's not like I'm saying, oh, we're skyrocketing him because of East Carolina or whoever the hell they played.
Maybe I should go see JJ McCarthy play live October 7th at Minnesota.
Ooh, that'd be nice. Nice, 20-point loss for Minnesota?
Yeah, might not be pretty, but yeah.
But at least you get to see him, you know.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's like I went to the Outback Bowl. What was it? Last year, and saw Raheem Sanders, Rocket Sanders, you know, like in the flesh. So like it was nice to see like that kind of stuff. Now I didn't have an iron in the fire. I didn't care who won the game or whatever. So that worked out. But it was nice to be able to see those players live.
Yeah, you saw Raheem Sanders before he ate too many cheeseburgers.
Oh no! Yeah, that's another one that I guess we should be concerned about is Rocket Sanders.
We'll see. I mean, I think he'll be fine, right? And maybe by the combine time, he'll cut down a little bit.
Well, I heard today that he's not practicing. So I mean, something's going on. I don't know what it is, but he has some kind of injury. Like I said, I have no idea. And of course, they won't tell you. Like Sam Jackson, the quarterback the sleeper quarterback I've been throwing out there for a couple weeks now, a month now, whatever. He actually started off hot, threw a perfect pass, perfect touchdown to Jeremiah Hunter. Everything's looking great. I'm about to victory lap the hell out of some people, and then he got hurt. On the next drive, so he got hurt in the second drive of the game, right after he threw a touchdown. And, of course, I can't victory lap because he didn't do anything else at that point. But point of the story is I can't find out. All it says is he had an upper body injury. I mean, that could mean a lot of things. I guess we're assuming it's a shoulder. But, hopefully for Devy purposes, you're probably not relying on Sam Jackson right now.
Yes, hopefully not. Now, we can talk about the quarterback at Arkansas. maybe as a potential riser too. We talked about McCarthy and KJ Jefferson looking like a tank out there. If you haven't seen that hit that defensive player laid on him, and the defensive player just fell down, and and KJ Jefferson kept running and scrambling outside, and I don't know if he like completed the pass or what, but this
Oh, he
the guy,
did. He
yeah,
did
the
too.
guy's a yeah, he's a massive and strong quarterback, that's for sure. So I guess the question remains, is he going to be able to do enough this season? And if he keeps putting plays like that out there, people are going to be forced to actually take him serious.
Well, I will say, like, his big time throw rate was low. It was 2%. I believe it was also against lower level competition as well. So, like, maybe he didn't really have to do too much, per se. But I will say his intended air yards was 10.7, which is what you love to see. So, like, people kind of wanted to talk about KJ Jefferson as not an NFL QB, just like, oh, system QB or whatever, like that kind of thing. Stuff like that leads me to believe that he's more than that, and that's why he's my QB4 in the class. So, we talked about JJ McCarthy, QB3. KJ Jefferson's my QB4 in the class. And nothing I saw in that game leads me to believe that he's not going to be the QB4. So, nothing's changed for me. And obviously you saw that play. Was that one play enough for you to move him up to QB4 in the class for you?
No, no, not off one play, but I also, well, I liked him, right? We both liked him beforehand, so I haven't even done a deep dive into the game, and like I said, I'm trying not to overreact too much to games where they were solid, but they didn't really, get pushed out there to see what they could ultimately put up. He was playing a safe game, I'm sure, and honestly, my concern's always been the wide receivers. Like, you're not going to throw those. You're not going to even attempt those big time throws if your wide receiver core sucks. If they can't separate and they're not winning contested catches, it's like you're throwing up picks or you're throwing incomplete passes all the time down the field. I think there's probably some sort of overlap between, if you don't have any weapon, capable weapons, could that bring down your big time throw rate? I suppose. I'm not sure.
So what I actually thought you were moving to earlier in the night was getting into the 2025 class, because we're actually starting to get a look at some of these QBs now. And we had Drew Alar, Connor Wegman, obviously Cade Klubnik, even Ty Simpson got on the field a little bit. So Devin Brown once again got on the field a little bit. So we've seen some of these players now, but I feel like we're starting to get kind of a clearer understanding of who the top end talent was. I believe both of us always had Connor Wegman at the top. Did anything change from week one, or do you still believe that Connor Wegman is kind of the truth when it comes to the 2025 QB class?
Yeah, well, Alar is also intriguing there too, and no, not much has really changed based on those top guys' performances, and yeah, ultimately some promising things out of both of them. Wigman, he's actually going to have some nice weapons there this year. I think we've been just kind of underselling anybody past Evan Stewart, but Moose Muhammad, who kind of I warmed up to this offseason,
What
you
was
kind of
that name?
initially Musay
Oh,
Muhammad.
Muse.
Uh,
Okay, now I
yeah, yeah.
understand.
Yeah, right, right. He was a guy who's like he's a great option, but honestly, he might even be passed up now. Who's it? Noah Thomas, who's kind of rising there as a sophomore. Another name that John has liked, and I don't know um, if that was somebody really on people's radars before the season. So that's just a nice sleeper to be able to pick up if you haven't had your waivers go through yet in the C2C league. You definitely want to be grabbing that guy because honestly, if we like Wegman, if we like that offense to maybe improve some in the passing game, we liked some of these tertiary options, secondary guys past Evan Stewart, and no Donovan Green this season either, the tight end who had a lot of potential because unfortunately he had some sort of season-ending leg injury.
Yeah, actually, so I spent most of this week building, I guess like 2023 models for all of the positions in CFF, because I really wanted to see like who out of all of these players are really standing out. And obviously we're through 1 week, so I'm not trying to like take too much from what we're seeing. But Noah Thomas was the 4th ranked wide receiver in week 1. Just week 1, not looking at anything else, not looking at previous seasons, recruit ranking, or anything like that. Literally just what he did and what conference he is, what year in school he is, like little stuff like that. But I don't want to end up looking at some FCS play or something like that. But think about that. Noah Thomas, 4th overall, wide receiver. that's pretty nice. And I don't think that I've ever heard a single other person talk about Noah Thomas. And I told Aaron, what was it? I'm trying to remember when it was. I think it was when I drafted the C2C or Campus to Canton League of Record draft. And I drafted Noah Thomas, and you said who? I said Noah Thomas. You'll hear it here. You'll hear it soon, or whatever. And then I showed you some blurbs from spring practices and stuff like that, and you were like, "Oh, okay, this is a little promising." And then everyone went to pick up Noah Thomas in that league this week from waivers, and then they all realized that he was already on my team.
I love that, and honestly, that's just one of those deep cuts that I got to give you props on, right? I mean, just a guy who nobody really expected him to come in and win that job necessarily, with Muhammad and with Evan Stewart being there and Donovan Green at tight end, and no, I mean he's making a name for himself, so definitely go out and grab him. What other big time players are you excited about, or maybe even just team systems, anything like that, based on just this early season success so far?
So like I said, I built all these models for each position, and I wanted to see like some separation between Drew Allar and Connor Wegman, like some of those players, those QBs in that class. The hilarious thing is, through week 1, Drew Allar and Connor Wegman are literally tied in the week 1 model. So it's absolutely hilarious. Now, I always had Connor Wegman higher, but I mean, it wasn't like substantially higher or anything like that. So if you go back to like the overall model, Wegman's still higher. But man, I'll tell you what, like I wouldn't make an argument, and I actually feel a little bit better about Allar than I did, because I was concerned with like who he was going to throw to and all that kind of stuff. And that actually leads me to a question that I had earlier. I was working earlier, and I was started to think about it. I'm like, we really focus on the players here. We focus on player values. We focus on players themselves. We don't get into the college football aspect as much. Every once in a while we talk about, this team, this coach, whatever, like that kind of thing. But we really don't get into it too much. But man, we knew Drew Allar was a good player. We knew Connor Wegman was a good player. Like, we knew Cade Klubnik was a bad player, But there's all these narratives around, okay, well, Drew Allar doesn't have anyone to throw to. Okay, well, Cade Klubnik has this coach. So it doesn't matter that he's bad, because he has that coach. And Drew Allar doesn't have anyone to throw to, so we don't want to have him. And, like players like that. Dylan Sampson is the 4th running back on their team, so we don't want to have him. Like all these different things. Noah Thomas was the 4th wide receiver on his team. We don't want to have that player. At what point do we go, the narratives don't matter nearly as much as the players, what the players have shown us? And I mean, sure, it might be a little easier for me to say that Noah Thomas has shown me something, because I've spent all the time building these models and diving deep into these numbers. So it's a little easier for me than for you. You're not necessarily going out of your way to find Noah Thomas film. So that's easier said than done. But that's also why this podcast exists. So, but at what point do we go, the player value, or the players themselves matter more than the narratives? Sam Jackson can actually be a good C2C or CFF quarterback, because we've actually seen him do it already, and then the team went out and got that player. The narrative that he can't throw and this and that, like whatever, guess what? He could throw. Now, it was the smallest samples, but like he became the starter. He blew up in the first drive, like things like that. That wasn't the best example. There's better examples, but
I think you list.
But how do you feel?
Listed off. Yeah, I mean, the examples that you gave there were really good, and then the wheels came off there for the Sam Jackson. 3 out of 4 attempts. Come on, let's 8.3 average. Maybe that's a discussion for another day after we actually see him for more than one game. Um, but ultimately, you gave some really good examples there. Dylan Sampson, another name that you've probably heard as like a sleeper, just dropped on this podcast because I know both you and I have him rostered in C2C leagues. Like, I mean, just super buried, but like you said, talent sometimes finds a way, and we should always keep that in mind. And something I keep coming back to, we mentioned Minnesota earlier. It's like, well, yeah, maybe we should have listened to a combination of the camp reports saying that there wasn't really one guy who was going to break out there, and especially not of the young guys. And then also the fact that, well, they don't really have like a 5-star guy coming in, like a big time player coming in. We need to first bank on talent, and then sometimes guys will just come out of nowhere. You can't really discern ahead of time who the talented guys are, but usually there's signs, right? Usually there's some sort of small sample as a freshman, um, that these guys are going to have a potential future as a stud in college, just because of the fact that they were very efficient, very explosive, whatever the case is. So yes, big time players are going to make big time plays. We got to be able to make sure that we're um, doing the player analysis, not just blindly doing the system and saying X coach always feeds his RBs equally or feeds one RB only. It's like, well, if there's not good talent there, why would a coach just keep funneling one RB touches? I mean, sometimes it happens, but for the most part, yes, the player analysis ends up being almost more important. And it's a deadly weapon when you can kind of wield both. You have a good knowledge of offensive situations and systems, and you combine that with saying, well, my player analysis is sound as well. I'm not getting too caught up in the hype or this narrative or that narrative. You're able to kind of discern that talent, plus the other knowledge you can get from doing research, knowing systems, knowing some of the coaching stuff too.
Yeah, not to throw you under the bus, but I'm about to throw you under the bus. I think of like a Logan Diggs. I said that I didn't feel like Logan Diggs was a great player. You said, hey, he's the starting running back for LSU. Guess what? He's not the starting running back for LSU. So I feel like there's so many examples, and I mean that's just one example of thousands. And it doesn't mean that it always works out, because there's that one coach that's really stubborn. He's gonna do things his way and all that. And so like that's a weakness of mine. I don't know who that coach is. But I can tell you that I didn't like Logan Diggs, and so I didn't think that he was going to be some like amazing running back either.
Yeah, and I mean, I just don't know that that's a viable example, only because he didn't even play, because he's not ready. I think it was Brian Kelly specifically saying that he couldn't go like full at practice, whether it's maybe he's still
Okay.
learning things, or
So I didn't know that. I honestly thought that he was active. So I take back the throwing you under the bus. It doesn't apply. I apologize.
Oh, no, and you're good, because you're kind of trying to make that bigger point of saying, sometimes we can't just assume a guy who hasn't been like elite is going to come into a system and then become elite, right? Unless he's transferring down to a G5 system, then Logan Diggs would probably be, a star. He'd go to Kent State, or that's probably not the best example, but you're right. It's a tough transfer into like SEC school. So, and if we're highlighting guys, we don't even need to spend time on them because we talk about them all the time. But Audric Estime, Notre Dame running back, he ran over guys this week. I mean, he's been good so far. Honestly, he's been as advertised, and he's going to be a threat. I don't know what his eventual NFL future is. He's not going to be like a Jonathan Taylor type athlete. No, I mean, he's not that fast, but honestly, he's going to be a hammer at the college level, and at the NFL level, he'll probably have a role as well.
Yeah, and what's nice is through 2 games, he's averaging 2 receptions per game. And so that's not something we really had last year. He had a receiving profile, but it wasn't anything spectacular. And not to say that 2 receptions per game is amazing, but you'll hear a lot of people, especially around draft time and stuff, talk about like a 20 or 20 something reception threshold that they want to see from guys. Obviously, if we're talking about 12-game season, two receptions a season, or two receptions a game. The math adds up. So I think that he's hitting a lot of thresholds that we already wanted to see. I don't think that Audric Estime is the best running back in the class, by any means. I do think that he is right there in that like mid level to where he can be better than maybe some of the players that have already gotten hype. And now Audric Estime ends up like ahead of them a little bit by the time it's all said and done. I definitely do believe that, and obviously, like, people are gonna fall in love with the size and the look and all that. Like, I feel like, thinking back to this last class, there were so many players that were like, well, he'd be great if he was just this big, if he just weighed this much, and like that kind of thing. We're not gonna have any of those question marks with Audric Estime.
Yeah, you're right about that. And speaking of big guys and coming through early in the season, and guys who maybe actually could be towards the top of the class at their position. Do you think that Keon Coleman, maybe after Marvin Harrison Jr., after Nemeka Egbuka, out of FSU, transfer in from Michigan State, Keon Coleman could be that next wide receiver in the class? Like, did he convince you just off that performance and what he's done in the past that he's maybe at that wide receiver 3 spot, or at least vying for it?
I mean, he was always up there for me. He wasn't in wide receiver 3 by any means, but I mean, I believe that he was my wide receiver. He was somewhere in like 24 to 30 range, something like that, preseason, offseason, whatever. And overall, not in the class, overall in Devy. And that's with freshmen and all that kind of stuff. So, when you start moving them up, I actually just wrote an article about Keon Coleman for DLF, and I said, like, I'm ready to move him up in Devy ahead of Zachariah Branch, like players like that are that are like less proven. So like I'm ready to move him up pretty damn high, because obviously Branch is moving up as well. I mean, he was already pretty high to begin with, but now that people have seen him score touchdowns, punting touch or punt return touchdowns, screens for big plays, all that kind of stuff, they're ready to move Zachariah Branch way up there. Now, mind you, Zachariah Branch didn't do very much in week 2. And, like, I'm not comparing the players at all, because I actually really do like Zachariah Branch. But he hasn't done hardly anything beyond the line of scrimmage, which kind of reminds me of Luther Burden. So that kind of freaks me out a little bit. But I just want to see more. So I'm not hating on Branch by any means. But Keon Coleman showed me that he's ready to take that next step. He's in a pretty prolific offense. Obviously, all eyes are going to be on him. I think he will get the draft capital, like everything we're going to want to see. So I'm ready to move him up, pretty damn high. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah, yeah, and that's kind of why you bank on the player talent, even if there is some ambiguity as far as, where was he going to slot in at FSU, or was he going to stay at Michigan State? But ultimately, sometimes that talent shines through. So, speaking of talent that shines through, I think we got to mention Travis Hunter here, a guy that I was definitely advocating for drafting, just because at the end of the day, if he plays a lot of wide receiver snaps, he's going to be a very, very fun player and someone the NFL draft wants to invest in. Whether he picks defense, offense, that's still to be determined. Like, he played an insane amount of snaps this week. I want to say it was well over 100, but the guy, he looked good on offense in what should have been even a bigger day for him. There was a 60-yard touchdown pass that just right off the fingertips, could have brought that in. And there was another overturned touchdown, which honestly, it was such a ticky tack call where most people on Twitter, they didn't even realize it got overturned. Like, they're like, no, that's good. So ultimately, very close to even more of an explosive day. And the guy on defense was just showing some unreal plays as well. So I guess, the conversation still is, does he play offense? But that was always my bet of like, well, his price is being depressed because there's uncertainty there. You want to invest in very top end talent. And I think that he delivered on that. He's going to be a guy that he's going to get a ton of media coverage if he continues at a pretty prolific pace. He could even be in the Heisman conversation. I've seen that that discussion already started.
Yeah, I'm probably gonna get hate for this one, but I'm kind of all out on Travis Hunter. I don't really want anything to do with them as far as like at cost, because obviously he's going to be insane. Like his cost is going to be insane right now. If you're trying to talk about a Devy league, or if you're talking about a C2C league, like regardless of what it is, people are going to say, I want, the world for Travis Hunter. And at cost, I'm all out, because if you really look at it, now you're saying like there's a couple misplays here or there, but I mean we can say that about basically any player. There's usually like we can say for Malik Neighbors and Jaden Daniels this past week, Malik Neighbors fell down and then there was an interception. Like there's always those big plays or those plays that just don't work out. That's just football. Now I'm not saying that we should necessarily take it away. I'm just saying I'm not using it and saying like, oh, I think he's amazing because of those missed plays. When we really look at it, the entire team did well. The entire offense did well. And Jimmy Horn Jr. did essentially what Travis Hunter did on offense. Now, Jimmy Horn Jr. did not play defense. He didn't play 140 snaps or whatever. I'm not trying to say that they're the same player. I'm not trying to compare the players. I am saying on offense, they were essentially the same exact player. Travis Hunter had 10.8 yards per reception. Jimmy Horn, 10.6. They both had 11 receptions in this game. PPR points per touch, 2.08 for Travis Hunter, 2.61 for Jimmy Horn. Yards per team pass attempt, 2.53 for Travis Hunter, 2.21 for Jimmy Horn. Market share, 23% for Travis Hunter, 23%. It's 23.33 for Travis Hunter, 22.94% for Jimmy Horn Jr. Points per game, Jimmy Horn actually scored a touchdown, so he actually scored more points for the game. So when it's all said and done, like for fantasy football purposes, Jimmy Horn was a better player. Now, once again, I'm not trying to say that Jimmy Horn is a better player than Travis Hunter. What I am saying is I feel like it was kind of fluky. I feel like Deion Sanders had to win his first game. Like it just had to happen, and he was going to do whatever it took, and that include having Travis Hunter on offense. I don't think it's going to continue.
Yeah, I guess to be determined on if it'll continue, but I think that using those statistics there are just, it's not really realistic for two of the most, the touchdown catch and the almost missed like 60-yard opportunity there, that completely flips things, right? Completely flips the conversation about this. And you don't even take into account the fact that the guy was already gassed on the field, plus the fact that he was also taking snaps off of offense to rest up, while the guy that you just plug statistics for is a full-time offensive player. It's just like the argument around Travis Hunter is just insane as far as, what he was doing out there on the field. But you're right. This does put him in a very costly position if you're anticipating his price to rise. So I'm not saying folks should be putting him ahead of like an Evan Stewart or any of those guys there. But, you start talking about like a Matthew Golden or a Luther Burden. It's like at this rate, I mean, I don't know. I would probably rather have Travis Hunter than those guys. I don't know about you, but I think that he's rising up in those terms. Who's got a better bet of going, round one and being a big time difference maker, actual stud wide receiver? I think it's him, and I think that the statistics aren't going to tell the whole picture. Maybe we'll have to revisit this later in the season and see how the production plays out for Travis Hunter.
I actually think that's interesting, and I definitely don't disagree with you. I feel like he has to make a decision at some point, and I mean, maybe it's not going to happen this year. I don't know. I mean, although is he a sophomore?
Yeah, he's a true sophomore, so he's got this season and next season to kind of make that full-time decision.
Yeah. So I guess he technically could play the entire year, do whatever. I just don't see it happening. I mean, I feel like you're at such a risk of injury, being on the field that often, you're straining your body to that extent. I mean, there's a reason why we don't see two-way college and NFL football players. Like, that just doesn't happen. So I played two-way in Pee Wee football. That's about the extent that that I feel like most people can do it. After that, it's pretty damn difficult. So all props. Every single prop to Travis Hunter. I'm not trying to hit on the player by any means. I'm just saying, like, I feel like he's up here I don't know if you can. There we go. He's up here after week 1 for like most everyone, and I have him like here. So I just want to I want to temper expectations a little bit. But you brought up a pretty good example, or actually an interesting example. You talked about Luther Burden. Obviously, I'm not going to talk about Luther Burden because I've done way too much of that. But I feel like people have gotten kind of hyped about Burden after week 1, and you were kind of saying, "Hey, I'm ready to move Travis Hunter above him," all that kind of stuff. Were you a little concerned by some of the play, because obviously we've talked a little bit about it. Maybe we didn't see the yards per reception, we didn't see the A dot, we didn't see stuff like that. So I mean, are you still a little? Are you maybe even more concerned even after a good game about Luther Burden than like you were kind of hoping that he was just going to come out and just be this like force?
Yeah, not a lot of things have really changed in my opinion yet, right? And probably same on your end, right? It's like he hasn't changed our minds that he needs to take that step forward. So ultimately, I need to see it this season and even the next season as well. But yeah, I mean, it hasn't the true breakout, even if people think, "Oh, yeah, he broke out again this, first game of the season." No, the true breakout hasn't happened yet to this point, and that's why I'm saying a guy who was actually used all over the field, used deep, used intermediate, making clutch catches at the end of the game to help his team win the game. Those were things that Travis Hunter was pulling off that Luther Burden, isn't quite able to do yet. So ultimately, yes, I, I'm not going to go too much further in depth on Luther Burden, but a guy who needs to show more. Absolutely.
I agree. So, I guess before we leave Colorado, what do you think of Dylan Edwards? Because obviously people are extremely hyped about him now. He had 3 touchdowns, didn't do much on the yard or on the ground. 24 yards rushing, I believe it was. But he had some big plays in the receiving game. Do you think that he's the truth? I mean, obviously, true freshman, right? So, like, we don't know exactly, is it true freshman? Am I wrong about that? You smirked. Usually you
Yeah.
smirk when I'm wrong. So,
Oh, no. No, you are absolutely correct
okay.
on
All right. So,
the.
true freshman. Good. Sometimes there's some screwy shit that happens, like this guy transferred before he ever played and all that. But, all right. So, true freshman. I don't know if anyone was truly hyped about Dylan Edwards before this game really happened, because it's Colorado. Like, what are the odds that he's actually like, that good, all that kind of stuff. I believe a 4-star prospect, which is great, but he's like 165-pound 4-star prospect, which is not great on a team that we didn't expect to be very good. But after that game, are you more hyped about Edwards? I think that you would possibly put in a claim, like a small claim for a waiver bid in a C2C league. I did the same thing. I put in like a 25% claim just so I could say, hey, I did my part in case no one else bids or whatever. But I didn't end up getting them.
Yeah, and I will admit that I was very low on him, probably similar to you. It's like the size thing was just a big deal breaker for me. And is he actually going to play at Colorado? Because Colorado was even bringing in like an Alton McCaskill, who, say what you want about like the ultimate efficiency and explosiveness of that player. Well, that's a established running back in college, and a guy who has more size brings more as like an every down player. And yeah, I got a little bit concerned, so I never really moved him up. But Dylan Edwards, what he did athleticism wise, explosiveness wise, like you said, maybe not on the ground, but just in the passing game, I think that's just going to get him more and more touches. And when you talk about the opportunity to land maybe a Deuce Vaughn of the next 3 years or 4 years, even, like that is just so tantalizing that for me, if I was in a league, I had the opportunity, I'm spending definitely a bigger chunk of the fab. I don't know if I'm spending 100%, but pretty darn close. Depends, I guess, how many claims you have per season, right? Because that really does affect the strategy involved with how much fab you use to pick up a guy like that in a C2C league. So in Devy, I mean, don't get too excited about Dylan Edwards, right? I mean, if somebody did draft him in a deeper Devy league, I'm not going and trading for him. But in C2C, it's just different with the amount of production that he might actually end up putting up here this season, but then in the future. So don't expect the same production game to game out of a guy like that. But ultimately, that's going to earn him a lot of respect from the coaching staff, from the team. So ultimately, expect some very fun plays at least out of Dylan Edwards there in Colorado.
All right, and then getting into a couple running backs here. We've talked about Damian Martinez quite a bit, but I felt like he had a pretty damn good game there in Week 1. Obviously, 164 yards, scrimmage yards total. He had almost a 16% big time run rate. Like stuff that I love to look at. Obviously, 21 touches, 2 receptions. Are you feeling any different about Damian Martinez after Week 1? Or you've always been a fan, at least. I don't know, but are you moving him up after that?
I'm a big fan, and when I look at the 2025 class rankings for those RBs, it's actually that I'm moving guys down. I'm moving Branson Robinson down, unfortunately, at Georgia. Just you tear a, was it patellar tendon? That's a big time tendon as far as explosiveness, as far as what that brings to your game and a long rehab process. Trevor Etienne, not necessarily bumping him down much, right? We still know he's talented and he's not injured, but Damian Martinez, I mean, he's going to put up so many points like in a C2C format. And, the funny thing was Damian Martinez could have had even more. Like he had an impressive week, but he kept getting vultured by DJU. And then I think they pulled him at the end of the game. They played Martinez fairly late, but ultimately what could have been an even more impressive day with just more touchdown luck going his way. I think there's some good things to come out of an offense that, quite frankly, probably impressed people or at least showed that they're competent out there.
Yeah, I agree. Like I said, I think he had a big week there. A player that I don't think you've been as hyped on is Devin Neal, and yet I feel like same thing. Like he had another big week as well. Are you feeling the same way where you're moving maybe people down, but even if you're not necessarily moving Devin Neal up, but he's just by proxy moving up in the ranks?
Yeah, you're right. You're right. Anybody who had I'm trying to think of the guys who were really hyped, like Jaquindon Jackson, right? If you had Jaquindon Jackson ahead of Neil, you're probably flip flopping those guys, right? Move Jaquindon down. We didn't really talk about him earlier in the show, but he hasn't been impressive so far.
We
And
should have, because that
yeah, we
was
should have.
one of the bigger misses for a lot of people. I mean, people were getting pretty damn hyped about Jaquindon Jackson, and yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, right. He was getting out carried by, the quarterback, weapon out there, and then also by his own backfield mate who's kind of just a do-it-all, running back and Micah Bernard. So that'll be interesting to watch how that split goes. I just don't think that Jaquindon is quite taken over the way that a lot of people anticipated or projected out there. But anyways, as far as like Devin Neal specifically for Kansas goes, I'm not really moving him up just because it was weak competition. They even I think pulled him early. Like he just did not get to play a full complement of snaps. But by no means am I moving him down. Like I'm still very encouraged, and yeah, it's not like I'm giving the guy away for free by any means, but I still have him pretty high. I think I have him higher than Audric Estime still, which I might, that's actually a good conversation to have. I don't know if you lean one way or another yet on those players, or if that's still to be determined just by the season. If Estime really keeps up that receiving production, well, he needs to take even a further step forward because, like you said, 2 per game, that's fine. But I mean, if he really, really outshines Neil there, then we'd be forced to kind of move Estime up past him.
Yeah, well, I told you, I said earlier how I created like the CFF models, and so in those models, Devin Neal was my RB3 for the week. Audric Estime is, well, I guess Estime's played 2 games, so Estime is my RB17 through 2 games. That's overall. That's through all of college football, all that kind of stuff, and that's just looking at the 2 games that have been played or 1 game or whatever. Then when we get into the actual like total model and everything, Devin Neal is ahead, but it's not by that much. I mean, we're looking about a handful of spots, so that hasn't truly, Actually, you know what? I don't have it sorted right. Okay, so now I'm looking at it correctly, and yeah, we're still looking at like a handful of spots. Actually, it's 3 spots, 3 spots ahead of Audric Estime as of right now. Now, obviously, we're dealing with small samples for a lot of this stuff for this season, so things are going to change. But I'll tell you what, Neil showed me what I wanted to see in week 1. At the very least, like you said, you're not moving him down. Where I feel like you were a little poo-pooing on Devin Neal before, maybe he wasn't special and all that kind of stuff. And maybe he's not truly special, but I feel like once again, he's another guy like an Estime that can just creep his way up. And next thing you know, like no one was truly talking about Roshan Johnson last year until we got to the draft season. All of a sudden, everyone's like, "Oh my God, Roshan Johnson, he's going to be amazing." It's like, where was this 2 months ago? Like, where was this 6 months ago? I feel like that they can be those kind of players, maybe even a little bit better because they have actual like full-on careers to show for, and production to show for, and not just, oh well, he could have been something if that player's there. So maybe it's not even the best example, but I'm just trying to say like somebody that really wasn't on the radar that ended up kind of being on the radar when it was all said and done. And I feel like that, or like a Ty J Spears, like somebody like that. But I was trying not to go like the G5 route. Somebody like that where you're like, hey, they're good. They can be a quality backup at the very least, but they could be a starting running back in the NFL.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I don't know if, Neil's mainstream enough, right? He's been on the radar for long enough, even as a sleeper, as a true freshman, where, yeah, I'm not sure if he came out of nowhere by any means, but like, yes, he had a good week at Missouri State and he didn't break 100 yards, but I do want to see against stiffer competition and him getting more playing time if he can actually, consecutively get 100-yard games and really rack up some long or big plays, explosive plays. Because if he keeps this up at the rate that he was going against Missouri State, that's great. But he's going to even get a better test against Illinois this next week. So I'm just kind of looking ahead and saying, it might not be all rosy and super optimistic as far as every game this season out of Neil. Again, I think he's a solid player. But I was going to say one player that kind of fits that criteria for you is Jalen Wright, Tennessee running back. And the unfortunate part of that is that Dylan Sampson, who we both like, is dominating there as far as at least the goal line or red zone touches. Like he had 4 touchdowns as a sub 200-pound back. What's up with that?
Yeah, he's like 190, and he's literally the goal line back. I mean, they put him in every time it was in a goal line situation, which is hilarious. And then he had 1 receiving touchdown as well, and it was literally his only reception of the day. I believe.
Right. His stat line was so obscure and just, in the first half, you looked at his stat line and it was like 1 carry for a touchdown, 1 reception for a touchdown. And it's like, what? He can't keep this up. And then he kept scoring. So maybe he's gained the trust, but if not, I mean, Jalen Wright looked like a little bit more of the every down type of back at Tennessee, and he's just better than Jabari Small. Jabari Small is not a special back. He is a compiler, but he also has a role. So we'll see if maybe Small starts to take that third string role. Ultimately, Jalen Wright's got some juice. He's going to test really well. So you want a deep sleeper, want a guy to go after on the waiver wire if he is available in your league in a C2C format. Like Jalen Wright could be that guy for Tennessee.
He absolutely could be. I've always liked Wright, but I think I've gotten a little too caught up in my Samson love, and so I kind of just I wanted to hate on Wright, and it was not right to hate on Wright. But going back to the CFF model, Wright was running back 17 in the model. Jabari Small is 128th. Like, Jabari Small should not be getting touches in this backfield. It should literally be the Jalen Wright and the Dylan Sampson show. I don't understand why Jabari Small is still in the field. Like, he has to have pictures of the coach or something. I don't know what's going on. But, man, just get him off of the field. So I think that's a great player to probably end it on, while Jalen Wright isn't the biggest well-known name or anything like that. I feel like we've covered a lot of players. Obviously we're gonna have plenty of time to cover every other player in college football, and we're just going to get more and more of a sample here. So hopefully we discuss some of the players that you were hoping to hear about and all that kind of stuff. But we're sitting at like an hour and 15, so we can definitely touch on those players or any other players that we didn't talk about in the future pod in a couple weeks. Who knows? Maybe I'll even get Aaron on in a week, and we'll try and go to more of a weekly thing. But that probably won't happen. So we appreciate you guys listening. I think Aaron's got to get out of here, so we'll go ahead and get out. But do you have any words of wisdom before you leave, Aaron?
No, just enjoy these games while they're here. Enjoy, this whole season. It's going to be a fun one.
I agree. We didn't even get. I had a couple sleeper players and stuff, but we'll get into those in the next one. And I'll have an extra week, and so I'll see if they're actually sleepers or if they were just a fluke. So we'll check all that out. Look forward to watching some more football this weekend. Hopefully, you guys enjoy your C2C leagues, enjoy your Devy leagues, all that kind of stuff. But for now, we're gonna go ahead and cash out. See you guys.